the Urban Tree Festival Book Club, curated by Peter Fiennes, who's also from the steering group of the Tree Festival. The Tree Festival itself is a volunteer-led festival, and we have to thank you very much for the donations you've already made. And of course, if you feel that after you've come to this event you'd like to donate something, then please do. We also would like to thank the Woodland Trust, who've also been a fantastic supporter, and the Mayor of London. So we mustn't forget them. And there's some people called Trees for Cities as well. So there are all sorts of different people who are now clambering on the bandwagon of the Urban Tree Festival because we've been so successful. So, Peter, I'm going to hand over to you and let you take on the world.
Well, I hope that's not necessary. Thank you, Andrew. That's brilliant. Yes, welcome to another Urban Tree Festival Book Club event. I'm really excited to be welcoming Anita Sethi here today to talk about her brilliant book, I Belong Here. Make sure you're all muted. I can hear a little bit of background crackle there, but hopefully that doorbell has stopped ringing finally. So Anita, a little bit about you. I'm going to say that you were born, this has come from you of course, you were born, well not you, your publishers, was born in Manchester, UK. Her new book, I Belong Here, A Journey Along the Backbone of Britain, is the first in her nature writing trilogy, which is really good news because I absolutely loved I Belong Here. Her writing has appeared in anthologies including Common People, The Wild Isles, and Women on Nature. She's written for The Guardian, Observer, Sunday Times, and many, many others, and appeared on radio often. So Anita, thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here, and also a big fan of Peter's work, so it's great to be in conversation with you. I love Footnotes. I'm really looking forward to your new book on Greece as well, which is out in October, isn't it?
Thank you, Anita, but we're not going to talk about me at all now. Now, I Belong Here is an absolutely brilliant book. It's unsettling, it's evocative, it's full of beautiful nature writing, it's gripping. It's a memoir mixed with nature writing, I suppose you could say. It's also a very political book. It's everything I love about a book. But the thing I love most about it is its title, Anita, which is absolutely brilliant. Did you come up with the title before you wrote it, as you were writing it? How did that come about?
Title actually popped into my head while I was walking, and it pops into my head after the incident which starts the book, and which I'll tell you about in a nutshell. So it was actually this week. This week is the anniversary of when I took a Trans-Pennine Express train from Liverpool to Newcastle, and I was going to Newcastle to read from an anthology I'm in called Common People, about my first childhood experience of the Lake District, as it happens. And I was on the Trans-Pennine train, and a man started racially abusing me. I won't repeat everything he said, but he told me to go back to where I'm from. And so in my book, I Belong Here, I'm from the north. And so that summer when he also asked me if I had a British passport, which I had my British passport with me. And so he told me that I didn't belong here, and I felt defiant. I've been told that I don't belong here so much throughout the course of my life, and I haven't really stood up to that. And then finally I felt enough is enough. I do belong here. And so one evening I was looking at the map of the journey from Liverpool to Newcastle, and in between that route there rises up the Pennines. And it was a Trans-Pennine train as well. The Pennines known as the backbone of Britain, and I was suffering from anxiety at the time, which can leave you very inert. It can lead to inertia, and I wanted to kind of fight against that. And so the Pennine Way kind of wound its way through my dreams and imagination that summer, calling me to walk upon it and to explore my sense of belonging along the way, and to say that I won't let this incident of being victim of a race hate crime stop me traveling freely and without fear in a country where I belong. But also about the title, thank you for asking about that, because it does have a threefold meaning in a way. So I belong here is something I'm saying in response to the man who racially abused me on the train. But it's also very much something that nature is saying itself. So I belong here is what I felt when I was walking through the North Pennines, and I was thinking about what the birds might be singing and what they might be saying, and I felt they were saying, I belong here as well, because too often we think nature's just here for our purposes and, you know, to soothe or provide solace to us, which it does. But thank you for calling the book unsettling, because I do think that nature can be unsettling in a good way as well. It can take us out of our comfort zones. And we feel the wildness of nature, and which is what I felt on my journey, and which I think you can feel in cities as well, because I grew up in a city. Very much my first experiences of nature were in Manchester, where I grew up, which is why I really care about this festival, and we can talk about it a bit later. But so I belong here is something that nature is saying. The birds are saying I belong here, the trees are saying I belong here. And the structure of the book was I structured it around the body. So it starts with mouth, which is about speaking up, and then skin, which is and then I parallel these parts of the body with landscape. So skin I parallel with like the grass and the grass of the earth. Then I move beneath the skin to the backbone, which is obviously the limestone, our backbone, but also the limestone formation of the Pennines. But then I go deeper to lifeblood, and then it ends with feet, because it's a big walking element of the book. But the lifeblood is, I wanted to get beneath the skin to show what really unites us. And so what really unites us, nature is an incredibly equalizing thing when you think about each and every one of us, regardless of our skin color, needs to breathe oxygen created by, you got it, trees. And so
Lovely
we breathe
trees.
and we say, we breathe in oxygen, which is, and sometimes we forget how amazing trees are, and they're absolutely at the heart of I Belong Here, because it's a book about breathing and about the fact that beneath the surface, beneath the skin, we all need to breathe, we all need oxygen, we're all human. And we're not only, but being human means being part of nature. So I wanted to also say we are not apart from nature, we are a part of nature.
Was that the third meaning of I belong here?
The third meaning, so that's the third
I'm
meaning
just trying
of
to
I
keep
belong
up with
here.
your third meaning.
Yeah, thank you, because I can actually do a whole hour lecture on each one, so thank you. So the third meaning was I belong here is something the book itself is saying. For far too long, the stories of marginalized communities, Black and brown communities, as I said, like I grew up in an inner city community in Manchester, and our stories have been made to feel as if they don't belong in books. So it's also something the book itself is saying, I belong here in book form. And it never, when we're on the subject of books, I always remember that books are made out of trees.
Yes,
paper,
absolutely. I'll go back to the title. It's such an emphatic statement. That's why I love it. That's why I've got it in my top 20 book titles of all time. I'd say.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I love footnotes. I know I love footnotes as a.
Well, thank you. So there's a lot about colour in the book. Of course, you talk. I don't know if you want to talk about the original incident that sparked this book anymore, but one of the things that struck me was people's reactions, and you talk about that a lot, throughout the book, about how the other passengers on the train reacted. And I don't know if you want to dwell on the initial incident, but I think it's really worth people hearing a bit more about it.
Yes. Do you want me to read that snippet from the prologue?
I would love you to, because you do it twice, once in the introduction and once in the first chapter.
In the prologue, I do it.
Yes.
Yeah, I basically synopsize it.
Give us a snippet.
It's no more than 5 minutes. The
That'd be
reading
great.
is no more than 5 minutes, right?
It's always good to warn people how long a reading is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know that in these things people like conversation. I know people have questions as well. So I'm not going to go into a 50-minute monologue.
Don't worry.
People will buy the book and read it. Or download the audio. So the prologue is called A Place Called Hope. I watched the wings as they soared through the sky. So sure of itself, so confident was the curlew as it caressed the clouds, so in its element. Where do I belong? Such a perennial question of existence, and I remember the flight of that curlew I saw in the Pennines when I considered the quest for a sense of belonging. The bird belongs in its fine feathers and in its nest and in the air, flying through the sky with such ease and grace. The fish belongs in its spectacular scales and in its watery habitat. The bulb belongs in soil in its state of becoming, growing towards the light. How could I feel a sense of belonging in my own body, in my own self, in the world? What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to feel like you don't belong? How can nature help us to find a greater sense of belonging? And how can we ensure people care enough to realise that nature and wildlife belong as much to the world as humans do? The definition of to belong is to be in the right place. We all belong here in the world, our shared home. If the conditions that make up our belonging on earth are removed completely, we will ultimately perish. Belonging is a need like water and air and food, vital elements in the natural world that every living organism needs to survive, making us realise that we are not apart from, but a part of nature. Nature flows through our very veins, fills our lungs and pulses in our hearts. I was on a journey through northern England in early summer 2019 when I became the victim of a hate crime, when a man attacked my right to belong here with words that hurt the very heart of me. The north is my home, having been born and bred in Manchester. The Trans-Pennine Express train even passed through the city on its route from Liverpool to Newcastle. The hate crime was a vicious attack on my right to exist in a place on account of my race. Am I allowed to say swear words?
Please, we love swear words.
I was called Packy cunt and told to get back on the banana boat and go back to where you're from. Yet this country is where I belong. Hate crime is on the rise in our hostile environment. After the attack, some advised me to stop travelling alone due to the dangers, and I experienced panic attacks and anxiety at the thought of travelling by myself. But I was intent on not letting a hate crime stop me moving about freely and without fear in a country where I belong. I was eager to continue travelling alone as a woman, asserting my right to exist. One day I was looking at a map of the north, and there, along the route of my train journey, falls the Pennines, the backbone of England, with its nature reserves, national parks, and areas of outstanding natural beauty. An area of countryside designated for conservation due to its significant landscape value. My heart quickened as I looked at the miniature mappings of its mountains and rivers. The Trans-Pennine Express journey had run a route tantalisingly close to such Pennine areas, but it would take walking and local railways to fully explore it. I longed to journey through the natural landscapes of the north, transforming what began as an ugly experience of hate and exclusion into one offering hope and finding beauty after brutality. Go back to where you're from. This is where I'm from. I'm from the north, the glorious north. Our emotional connection with certain places runs deep and forceful as a river, and during and after the hate crime I felt how deep my connection was with the north. Although a racist had viciously told me to leave, I felt a magnetic pull drawing me back, not to get further from it, but even deeper into it. My journey is one of reclamation, a way of saying, to adapt the Woody Guthrie song title, this land is my land too, and I belong in the UK as a brown woman, just as much as a white man does. Journeying through the so-called backbone of England also feels symbolic, a way of showing backbone myself, and that I will not let having been the victim of a race hate crime curtail my movements through the world, despite the trauma and panic attacks that followed. Should I go on, or should we converse for a bit? Because I thought it was interesting you raised the issue of colour, because
yes,
colour is really central to the book, because I have a section called Walking as a Woman of Colour. And
yes,
I really wanted
I'd love to talk to you about that, but because you talk about the colours of nature and the walking as a woman of colour, and I want to also segue into the whole idea of walking alone as a woman in the landscape. And in fact, I have many other questions, but let's talk about that first.
So when I was growing up in childhood, the colours of like brown, my skin colour and my hair colour were very demonized. They were, seen to be ugly. But actually, why it's so important for children to get out in nature at an early age is that you realise that these colours are all around us in nature. Like the tree barks are brown, not the ones behind me, which they're covered in beautiful green moss. So, but the tree barks are brown, soil is black, and these colours that have been so demonized are all around us in nature. And so, colour to me is really fascinating. So thank you for picking up on that. And I also think it's, the term woman of colour is quite amusing, because so I say, I'm a woman of colour, but I'm also a woman who loves colour. And that's what, I love. We take so much for granted, and, we take able-bodied people, for example, take our vision for granted. I'm short-sighted, so I never really have, to be honest, because I know what it's like to lose my glasses or contact lenses, and not be able to, you know, for everything to go blurry. So anyway, yeah, I love looking at the colors of nature and the astonishing colors, kingfishers, the purple
Well, it really
thistle.
comes out in your book. There's such vivid descriptions of the
I
colour.
really, really appreciate
Way.
that.
And
Because also it's interesting how there's some interesting studies about how color can affect our mental health and improve our moods and like give us a boost in that way. And I did experience that, you know, walking through the world and also attuning my vision on the external aspects of nature.
yeah,
The glorious blossom on a tree helped me with my anxiety, because anxiety, you're very ruminating and, you know, trapped in your own thoughts. But when you focus on the externalities, such as, you know, just really appreciating the color blossoming on a tree, which we've got in the darling buds of May, we've got in this glorious month that we're in at the moment, is just amazing for the mental health. Last week was Mental Health Awareness Week, which was, the theme was nature, but you know, we need that awareness every single week of the year, to be honest. But this is a special event for me to do, because it's literally this week that I was on the Trans-Pennine Express train. It's the anniversary this week, so.
Sometimes it seems to soothe you, and being out in nature, and other times it seems to be harder for you to engage with it. I noticed that through the book.
Yeah. Well, you talked about walking alone, and so I didn't want to romanticize too much.
The hitchhiking moment.
Oh yeah.
I got extremely worried. Do you want to talk about hitchhiking?
Well, I didn't know whether to put that bit in or whether to, you know, cut it out. But then I decided to leave it in and be honest and think, well, I didn't want to romanticize too much how you know, that it's, I didn't want to show the journey to be easier than it was, because it's extremely challenging hiking through the natural landscape. It's extremely challenging. Walking alone through a city can be challenging as well in its own way. And also walking alone is challenging both emotionally and psychologically as well as physically. Obviously there was massive challenges in my journey. I was carrying a rucksack, and
it's very funny.
I didn't even do Duke of Edinburgh, put it that way. I didn't even do the Duke of Edinburgh. So I don't come from a background where I'm used to being taken for long country walks or hikes. So my walks were very urban. They were walking around the city, around Manchester, and which I did love.
Lack of preparation for your journey.
Lack of preparation wasn't really. No, I've always been a fan of spontaneity, but I wouldn't recommend not preparing. I would. Preparation's always great, but when I did prepare, the more that I prepared along the way, it was just glorious to get to know and explore maps. So I just fell in love with maps and learning not to be intimidated by maps and map reading. So no, but it's incredibly challenging. It's very physically demanding, but also emotionally and psychologically, all that alone. I mean, I wrote this before, I did the journey before the pandemic, but it's something that we've all had to go through, isn't it? Being alone and grappling with loneliness. So loneliness is a big theme of the book, you know, how it feels to be alone.
Yes.
But I do find a certain companionship with nature. And there's one bit in the book where I'm talking about how people throughout the ages have found that sense of companionship with nature, and you know, feeling that it can be a friend. And you know, it's a living thing. Like the river's a living entity, trees are living, breathing entities, and
you have a very intense relationship with the rivers you come across in particular.
Well, I planned the route of my journey around rivers, the river Aire, which means strong river, Ribble, Tees and Tyne. And there's something just really interesting, because there's a phenomenon called blue care as well as green care, which is about how being near water, which is in my background. By the way, everyone, I'm not literally in this beautiful wood surrounded by trees, but there's something how being near water can be so amazing for our health, for us, for our mental health as well. Because, you know, if you think of it, so much of our bodies are made of water. We are 70% water. And so, but I mean, there's a bit in the book where I say, I'll just read it, it's literally a paragraph. Here, high in the North Pennines, is one of the few places in Britain where you can see the most ancient plants, such as lichens. It's lichen and not lichen. I mean, I'm very honest about my inability to pronounce words from the natural world, because I didn't grow up in a family where we would say, isn't, have you admired the lovely lichen? The lichen, isn't it?
Well,
Lichen.
when I read my book for an audiobook, I had to be corrected on that word. So
Right. I had to be corrected a lot when I did my audiobook as well, but the producer was amazing. So like in mosses, fungi, and in autumn and winter, wood, and I have picked the most tricksy bit, gentians and wood anemone, in spring, and globe flowers and heather in summer, which have so far managed to survive since the Ice Age. Thinking about such deep time all around draws me out of my loneliness, and I feel how fleeting a human life is, how miraculous that mine has for these moments crossed paths with such astonishing life forms which provide a kind of companionship. I feel how the natural world can be in friendship with us, and we with the natural world. I recall Viktor Frankl's description of a dying woman in a concentration camp, who through the window could see just one branch of a chestnut tree with two blossoms upon it. She described the tree as the only friend she had in her loneliness. So I thought that was really moving when I...
Very nice and very apposite for the
so, and also because I was started thinking about companionship and friendship, because that same summer that I was racially abused on a train, a friend of mine died very suddenly, aged just 28 years old. So this is very much a journey through grief. Like it's a book about loss as well, and about grief. And I was thinking what it means to actually lose someone, and but also how we're living in an age of loss. The natural world is being destroyed around us, which
you
don't realize or appreciate because we're not seeing. I mean, this week that big report's come out about nature, hasn't it? We're losing the natural world. It's grieving for the natural world, but also saying it's a clarion call to save what we can while we still have time, and we do still have time to save the natural world. And it's saying that by destroying the natural world, by destroying nature, we are destroying ourselves, because, as I said right at the beginning, we are part of nature. We need nature to breathe. We need those trees to breathe. So if we destroy them, we're destroying ourselves. So I mean, this journey was started off through the incident of being racially abused on a train, but also a journey through grief from the death of my friend who died very suddenly that summer as well. So I was thinking about, what does it mean to be human? What connects us? What does it mean to be alone? And, and it was a journey through all those emotions, and walking, as you'll know from being a footnotes expert, a footsteps expert as well. Walking helped me to process all of the walking in nature as well, being immersed from nature. And also the thing about nature is that it's incredibly non-judgmental. A tree or a bird or a flower is not going to ask me where I'm from. It could not care less.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. A tree or a bird or a butterfly, they're all living things. They don't care what my skin color is. So it's incredibly liberating, because you can be surrounded by very living energies and yet not be judged. So that was incredibly liberating.
You've got a really nice quote here, which connects your experience on the train of racist abuse with the natural world. And you're right, if you witness the natural world in distress, would you look the other way, or would you call out for help? I thought that was a really nice way of putting it.
Thank you. Well, it's very much about bearing witness. The book is an act of bearing a witness. And that started off from the fact that I had to go in the police station and give a witness statement. When you're a victim of a crime, you're a witness as well as a victim. And so I had to give a statement in the police station and bear witness to what had happened. And I felt a very strong urge to put down in paper, on the paper out of which trees are, trees make that paper, to put down in paper in ink what had happened, but also to continue my journey and continue bearing witness along the way to what I saw, and to also, how humans are. It's about the cruelty of strangers, but also the kindness of strangers. And I wanted the kindness to win out, and to say that we need to care for each other better, but also to care for nature better as well. But then when I made my journey, it was very spooky, because I did feel that nature was bearing witness to us as well, and that came from a tree. And I think it's the silver birch tree, isn't it? On the barks of trees.
Yes.
look as if they have eyes, which is incredibly spooky. Oh, here it is. So I went for a walk, and I so we passed dead ferns. This was with the guy, with the hitchhiker in bit, which I'm glad I lived to tell the tale, but it was quite dangerous to do. But
No, where
thank you for reading this so quickly. So, thank you for reading it so carefully as well. I really appreciate it.
If I could just tell everyone here who hasn't read it, it's an absolutely scintillating.
Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you, Peter, whose work I so admire as well. So this tiny bit, so we pass dead ferns that have turned golden, very beautiful in their dying and death. I look at the delicacy and beauty of the leaves. There are some bird feeders in the beech tree, and I spot a bird feeding before fluttering away. I hear birds singing, but cannot quite identify the sweet sound. I look at silver birches. With the eye engravings in their bark, they seem to be looking at us too. And this was we pass another tree that has blown over, probably another beech, my companion muses, and walk on past the most enormous tree, perhaps an oak, he says. I stand under it for a few moments, marvelling and gazing through its branches at the burnished leaves and startlingly blue sky. We continued to walk back to where we set off from, savouring each moment of the light, past bright red berries and trees, on along the River Tees, and look back to see the Force, that's a waterfall, High Force, and shrinking away into the distance, disappearing around the bend, and then it is out of sight. But this, along the way, I did kind of what's known as talks walking, the phrase coined by Robert Frost, which is, I didn't want the experience on the train to close down my experience of the world, but to help me still be open to the kindness of strangers and realize that, human beings are fundamentally good, and there are more good human beings out there. And so this person that I ended up chatting to along the way, he slept under a spruce tree, and he said this is a spruce tree, which is a good insulator if you need to sleep outside. He says, pointing up at a tree so huge I crane my neck to see it. Have you slept under a spruce before, I ask. Many a time, he says. Where, I ask. Many places when I was homeless, and I was drinking half a bottle of whiskey every night. So, this is very much a book about home as well, and I encountered this person who'd lived homeless, but I wanted to also, I was told by the racist on the train that this wasn't my home, and yet you can't say that to a northerner who is from the north, and it's so much in my veins that I'm from the north. And I wanted to also make the point that when you start from the premise that we all belong in the world, our shared home, we all belong here in the world, is a very equalizing thing. So I very much along the way explore home, and use the word unsettle, which is, I'm glad you used that, because there's also a chapter called Settle where I explore notions of, how human beings started to become settled and live within brick walls rather than out in the wild. Because, when we were humans first people the earth, we were a nomadic species, a migratory species. We lived out in the wild and learnt to, then build fires. And so only over the course of hundreds of years did we start to become more settled in a way. So I wanted to explore how, well, I was living in a very unsettled state, but how being unsettled and learning to find a sense of belonging in the wild rather than within the bricks and mortar home it did give me a greater sense of belonging through what we've talked about, connecting with the colours of the trees, looking at the colours of nature, realising that I belong here, and the colours of which I am comprised belong here, even though they've been kind of stigmatised and demonised culturally. And I do think a lot of it is societal and cultural conditioning and ignorance. So I wanted to, when you walk out in nature, you're free of all of that, really. You can kind of decondition all of that thinking.
Why do you think you have a sort of connection and a love for nature? How, given your sort of upbringing in a city,
So in the book, I talk about a bit about my childhood, and how the first time I really I fell in love with nature in an urban setting. And it was through the tiny garden in Manchester, and it was like on a busy crossroads, and my mum was suffering from depression at the time, but she started like cultivating the garden, which was like a strip of concrete. It was like nothing, but she cultivated the soil, my very first memory, which I kind of drew on throughout my life, was of a bulb being planted in soil, and understanding what roots, like looking at the soil and understanding that the bulb would one day grow, and the bulb would do something magical, and then I didn't quite understand what until I saw that first daffodil, that Wordsworthian moment of seeing the daffodil all at once. I saw a golden daffodil. I think a child in an inner city can have that, as much as our conventional ideas of who nature belongs to. And so, and then I mean, for me, the bulb became a symbol of hope, because even though the garden was winter would come, the flowers would die and wither away, the trees would lose their blossom. I knew that, I came to understand the seasons, and that it would grow again. And also, it's very much a book about. So that's where I did fall in love with nature in urban spaces, and looking at between walking through the city, which could feel incredibly claustrophobic, and learning to see the dandelion between the cracks in the pavement, which is why the book's very much. I chart my journey through the Pennines and the Pennine Way, and saying I belong in the countryside, but I also do make a clarion call that cities need to be recalibrated to be greener spaces, because we need more trees planted on streets in cities, because coronavirus, the COVID crisis has shown just how unequal access to nature is. There's a big report at the moment out, which is out in the news today, about air pollution, which has been linked to, it has increased coronavirus deaths, because and so the book's about the air we breathe. It's about the air. Sorry, what was that?
I mean, it is entirely unequal, isn't it? People's access to nature, and it has
absolutely
health impacts. So I wonder if you think you have thought about what we can do about that, about how we can bring nature more into the cities.
It's an incredibly timely week to have that discussion, because lockdown was eased this week, yesterday, and after lockdown 1.0 was eased, there was a sense, there was talk about how we're going to rebuild the world to make it a better, fairer world, and it didn't really seem to happen. Lockdown eased and everything, suddenly the streets were just as polluted, but I really hope that after this lockdown 3.0 lifts, that the world will be recalibrated to be more equal. I think that we need to start from the recognition that each of us are equal. We are all human. We all need that oxygen in our lungs. We all need access to nature.
Are you hopeful that that has been the effect of the lockdown and the pandemic?
I have to keep hopeful, because if you don't, it's very dangerous to slip into despair. But it does at times, to be honest, it feels incredibly challenging. But the past year more than ever has seen a clarion call for justice, and we've seen that we had the Black Lives Matter protest, but then there was also more conversation around environmental justice and how racial and environmental justice connected. The idea that there are more Black and minority ethnic people living in cities. We are more susceptible to having our lungs polluted with dirty air. So I know I talk about in the book how the skin we're in affects the air we breathe. The skin we're in literally affects the quality of air we breathe. So I am hopeful. I am hopeful, but I have to stay hopeful. However, I do think the onus should be on everybody.
Really, really hopeful, in the sense that although you'd had that horrifying experience, and you made it very clear how difficult it is as a woman of colour walking alone through the Pennines, etc. You met some incredibly friendly and encouraging people. You had some.
I did, and also I met people across age and cultural backgrounds as well. So along the way, I ended up walking with everyone ranging from a 13-year-old girl who's like, I met her family, and her mum entrusted us to walk up Penny Ghent together.
And then, quite a trust.
To a 90-something-year-old man, so who just walked along the river together, and it was lovely. And so I do think that staying open to the kindness of strangers is important, and believing that people are fundamentally good, and also that I do think the realization that despite our different skin colors, genders, cultural backgrounds, remembering that fundamentally, as I say, beneath the skin remembering the lifeblood of which flows through all of us. So the lifeblood in the book is paralleled with the rivers, of course.
Yes.
It's a very equalizing thing. And I have to say that when I was lucky enough to go bird watching with Margaret Atwood, and
we can but dream.
Really, yeah, I had to kind of wake up the next day and check the photos to check it hadn't been a dream. I did go bird watching, but she did deepen my understanding of nature. Because I'm also in my other hat that I wear, I do literary interviews as well. So it's interesting being interviewed by you, and which is why it's my instinct to start interviewing you. But anyway, Margaret, she made the point that to quote her, she says, "Loving thy neighbor means loving the air in their lungs. If you love the air in their lungs, you have to love what makes the air in their lungs. What makes the air in their lungs is nature, is trees." And then she talked about how trees are, and their connection with the sea and the seabed, and how about basically how everything is connected, but we don't see those connections. But once we see those connections, it makes us take care of nature better, and also to treat other people better, because
so there's a nature cure. I mean, you do write about this in forest bathing and so on. But
I write about nature cure, but I write about how I prefer the term nature care, because I think nature cure is a fascinating term, and it was interesting, the history of it too. It was a famous book called The Nature Cure by Richard Mabey.
Oh, yeah.
And it started off this link between nature writing and mental health, and how nature's so good, important for our well-being. But I like the term nature care, which I just wrote, I just came up with myself, actually, because I think that for so many of us, we do need recurrent access to nature. I don't think it's a quick fix, which is why absolutely when lockdown is easing, and we're thinking about how the world can be improved for the better, recalibrated for the better. Nature's just not just a quick fix. We need it integrated regularly into the fabric of our lives, which is why we need those trees planted on urban streets.
Yes.
Which is why we need more green spaces, which is why we need more parks in cities. Manchester's an incredibly, the centre doesn't have a park in it, but they're building. There's a big project to build a new park in the city centre. And there's something called Trees for there's an initiative of planting trees in Manchester. So all of those kind of things, to use the metaphor, grassroots initiatives. And I think in terms of how we can all create change, I just think of the image of the bulb as well. Like, you plant one bulb, a small bulb, and it will grow into something beautiful. To think what each of us as individuals can do, and the fact that often it can feel really overwhelming, the amount of change that needs to happen. It can feel, I feel like, how can I possibly do this? Every child kind of dreams of changing the world in some way. But just think about the bulb, and planting a bulb, and cumulatively, if everyone planted a bulb, both actually and more metaphorically, then the world amazing things would flourish. So.
You're absolutely right. That's a very hopeful thought, and a lovely thought for the Urban Tree Festival as well. I'm just going to say quickly, if anyone's got any, because I've noticed we're getting through this, if people have got specific questions, can you put them in the chat, and I will notice them. Definitely, you're getting lots of love in the chat. That's the main thing, and you've inspired people to walk the Pennine Way, which is, of course, you'll have to explain to any soft Southerners here exactly what the Pennine Way is, please.
The Pennine Way was Britain's oldest long-distance footpath, and it is 431 kilometres long, and it stretches through what's called the backbone of Britain, because it does connect east with west, north with south, and it stretches from the Peak District, which this year celebrates its 70th anniversary, and it's known as the lungs of the industrial north. Stretches from the Peak District. So my journey began in the Hope Valley, which is why Hope was both. I mean, I just love the symbolism of places. It was actually seeing that place on the map which made me do the. If I hadn't seen a place called Hope, I'm not sure I would have made the journey. And I think
you started on Hope Street in Liverpool as well, didn't you?
I started on Hope Street in Liverpool, which I'm going to go back to, because I'm going to retake the Pennine Journey and give away free copies of the book along the way.
Oh, brilliant. When are you doing that?
I want to do it this month because it's this month. It's May is the anniversary of which I was racially abused. I was going to do it yesterday, but then I hurt my back carrying my box of author copies. Books are dangerous as well.
Yeah.
So I just have to be kind to myself, and the book's about being kind to ourselves as well as to other people. And I will do it this month, but it takes a lot of logistical planning about the fact that I can't carry so many books myself, so I need to logistically plan. So I'm going to work with independent bookshops and organizations and to distribute the books. I will take some books physically on with me to give out as well. But I have to think about not completely spraining my back. All these things happened in the book as well, didn't it? Me hurting my back because I did not realize
my yourself as being very small because we've never met. All I have is image of this huge rucksack and you bowing underneath and then falling. You fell down the Pennine Way or fell off a rock or something and hurt
pretty
yourself.
much, yeah. So the Pennine Way snaked through my dreams and also really inspired me to research other long distance footpaths. So the Pacific Crest Trail is one that Cheryl Strayed walks upon in Wild. The Salt Path by Raina Wynn. I mean, someone's asked me in the questions which writers who wrote about walking would you recommend. There's The Salt Path by Raina Wynn. She writes about walking in, it was Cornwall, isn't it? It's a path down
around the coastal path, yes.
The Footnotes by Peter Fiennes. So yeah, I really actually interested in there's so much about the history of walking that's fascinating.
I think you made the connection.
Wanderlust.
You've made the connection as well about the connection between walking and protest.
Thank you so much, because that's absolutely crucial to the book. So I call this book a journey of reclamation. It does become a journey of restoration as well. By the end of it, I do think the word restoration becomes as important to me as reclamation. But so the etymology, I'm a total word geek and obsessed with where words come from. It was a book about prose as well as about people and place. So so reclamation means to cry out against, to protest. And then I researched the history of walking through Kinder Scout, which is part of an area of the Peak District. That's where the Kinder Scout mass trespass happened, which opened up access to the countryside, to green spaces, to the lungs of our country. Because before, our land is very unequally owned, and that was a story of belonging as well, because the land was owned by aristocrats. And so those protesters, that was about protest, and they were known as the Manchester Ramblers, which obviously inspired me, my Manchester rambles. So for me, I see, and that led to the creation of the Pennine Way. That's how the Pennine Way formed. It led to the creation of the Peak District, national parks, and long distance footpaths. And so learning about that history of the North inspired me. So I wanted my journey to be a continuation, and say walking can be a radical and political act. Walking can be a way of saying, I belong here. But then I wanted to take that further. I walk in their footsteps, but then walk further by incorporating the fact that I belong here as a woman of colour. Then I look into the history of civil rights, and walking is a massive part of that. You had the bus boycott. So Rosa Parks, who's an inspiration of mine, she refused to give up her seat on a segregated bus. And, she really did inspire me that day on the train. But she didn't give up her seat. And she's, what she did was saying, I belong here. She suffered for it. And she suffered much more than I did, because, she got arrested rather than the other way around. So I do realize that, and I do check my own privilege in that respect. But so walking became a massive part of the civil rights movement, because people stopped taking buses in protest against the segregation of buses. And there was a protester called Mother Pollard. She said, my feet is tired, but my soul is rested. And so then that led to Martin Luther King's and that his amazing speeches. I've been to the mountaintop, and that paved the way for the civil rights. Martin Luther King gave an inspirational speech in Newcastle, where I was journeying. So all these kind of things and connections really inspired me. But then, of course, last summer, we had the Black Lives Matter protests. So I was going on those as lockdown 1.0 was lifting, and thinking a lot about the history of protest and belonging, and how walking could be a form of protest, a way of saying, I belong here. but then I wanted the book to be an act of reclamation, but also of restoration as well, restoring things that have been lost from history
It
and
does.
lost from understanding.
It feels like, well, that seems to be the arc of the book. Although towards the end, you do wash up against a wall, Hadrian's Wall, which
Hadrian's Wall, which seems more symbolic than ever, and it's amazing because when I got to settle, that I got to absolutely exhausted with my massive rucksack, and I was looking at the sat down in the train station just to rest, and I saw a blue plaque to Alfred Wainwright, and so young Alfred Wainwright, he walked what's known as the Pennine Journey and wrote a book called Pennine Journey, and I only learned about it then. I was incredibly excited to learn about it, and then I kind of read it along the way, and his goal was Hadrian's Wall. So I thought, interesting. I thought, well, I don't have to follow the Pennine Way so rigidly. Wainwright didn't, so he did the Pennine Journey, which is more circular. So I wanted to do the Pennine Way, but do it my way, as it were. And that liberated me from my, the limits of my own physical limits, and to be more spontaneous as well, and to follow desire lines. So desire lines and desire paths. So when you follow your gut rather than only following a map. So anyway, that's where I got the idea to make Hadrian's Wall my endpoint of my Pennine Journey. But of course, then it was a symbol of empire building. He made his journey in 1938 when Hitler was building, wall building, and it was an age of empire then and ownership of land. But so when I wrote the book, Trump was still in power, and he was literally building the wall. The chants of build the wall. And the building of the wall caused massive environmental devastation. So again, I wanted to make the parallels between political and environmental damage. So the wall bulldozed through massive sites of, protected wildlife reserves, butterfly sanctuaries in America, and so did Hadrian's Wall. And so it's a clarion call to build bridges, not walls, as well.
Walls, yes. I've got a couple of questions which are popping up here as well, so I'm just going to ask you them. Are you able to talk? Well, I'd love to hear. Are you able to talk about the next two books in your trilogy?
Absolutely. The next one is called Nocturne, and it's a journey through darkness. It's literally going into the darkness. That's why I wanted to go to Greece, but then lockdown hit. That's why I've got to read Peter's book about Greece instead, which is coming out in October. We'll plug there. So I'm walking through darkness, exploring nighttime, but also deepening my exploration of themes of belonging, trauma, and mental health. And
are you walking alone again?
Absolutely, walking alone, which we've all had to do so much in lockdown. So I've got it has been. Lockdown's been incredibly challenging. So I will write about that in a book about. They're not all going to be lockdown walks. Some of them will be lockdown walks, but I also want to capture this time now, the opening up of the world, which is very exciting, even though I've not got on the first plane to Portugal, but this week I'm still here in the UK. But and then the third book is The Man Told Me to Go Back to Where I'm From. And in my first book I do. So in the third book I tackle the question, but where are you from originally? So I tackle where I am from originally through the wildlife of where I'm from originally. My mum was born in a country known as the Land of Many Waters, abundant for its waterfalls. That's Guyana. My dad was born in Kenya, which is obviously renowned for its wildlife. There's this very stigmatizing and false idea that Black people don't like nature because we are more associated with urban areas. Again, it's a falsehood that there's no nature in urban areas, which again is false. But the fact is that brown and Black people, like my parents, came to cities to work for the jobs that no one else would do. Doesn't mean that we don't love nature. Exactly, as I say in the book, my parents come from countries where nature is absolutely abundant. Every human being is got a connection to nature. Every one of us is part of nature. So that's what I wanted to say. Then I look at the history of how colonialism is actually massively about nature. It was about people owning nature. The plantation, I was told to get back on the banana boat, which leads into a long disquisition about how plantations were built, banana plantations. And so I asked the questions: who does nature belong to? How people throughout history have exploited power So nature belongs to them and is seen to not belong to us. And then I make the point that nature belongs to all of us. Doesn't really, but we are all part of it. We all belong to nature rather than nature belonging to us.
No, you make that very powerfully, and you talk about language a lot in the book as well.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with language. Absolutely.
Other people's questions, not mine. Just, did this journey feel quest-like, or did some quest narratives spring to mind when trekking? Says Tom Kay. Did it feel like you're on a kind of quest, basically, on a mission?
I felt that the quest was definitely. It was the quest. The kind of the landscape itself revealed itself in the language of landscape. So the fact that you know, Cecil, the place called Cecil, Scars, for example, was a big part of my quest. Was like I went walking, literally walked through Scars. Scars is the name of limestone cliffs, but also the name of wound. And so I thought of the phrase Wounderland. And so my quest was not to escape from trauma like Wainwright was doing. It was to get deeper into it. It was like to literally walk through the Wounderland. So the quest was to get deeper into it. But I'm not sure. I'm very, very lucky to have a trilogy because I can continue the quest. I do very much like the idea. I do very much like that narrative because we're, you know, searching for something. I do think nature revealed a lot of it. But you know, whenever you ask, whenever there's an answer, there's always another question. So
here's another question. You say your family is from Pennine. You say your family wasn't the type to go walking in the countryside when you were young. Have you introduced them to going out into nature now?
Oh, I have nieces and nephews, and they do like they love going to the Peak District and stuff. So I hope that things will change for the next generation.
Yeah, do you think
and I hope that,
changing?
Yeah, and also, as I say, I think the mindset we don't somehow like the countryside is just so wrong. It's just that false idea that we don't belong there. And I think that I'd encourage everyone to get out into nature in the countryside because it can be very liberating. You know, it's not a scary place. You might get some weird looks, like I do stick out like a sore brown thumb there, but as I say, you know, no tree or bird or flower is going to ask you, where are you from? That's why it can be incredibly liberating.
That phrase, where are you from, comes up time and again, and rather shockingly, it comes up from Prince Charles at one point.
Yes, he did. He asked me, he did. And then that happened the week of the Windrush scandal broke as well, which is showing just how deep systemic unbelonging is. So, you know, Black and brown people who belong here have been made to feel as if they don't belong here. They were literally told they weren't British by the government, by our Home Office, by the powers that be. It's a very, very real and systemic thing. The notion of unbelonging. I mean, it's shocking. It was actually heartbreaking when you learn about the Windrush generation, what happened to them. You know, they locked grandmothers up in Yolswood Detention Centre, took away their belongings, and some of them died early of the trauma of it. And so that week that the Windrush scandal broke, I met Prince Charles at the Commonwealth People's Forum, where I was there to read from an anthology. And he asked me where I'm from. And I said Manchester. And he said, well, you don't look it. And laughed. And well, the idea that, I mean, is this idea that brown and black people are somehow not as British as white people is one that I wanted to smash and to say, well, brown and black people are as British and therefore belong as much in places regarded as quintessentially British, such as English countryside. People often have asked me around this book, you know, about belonging and nature in the countryside. And I said, well, the toxic notion that brown and black people are somehow not as British has led to the consequent idea that we somehow don't belong in places regarded as quintessentially English and British, such as natural landscapes, green landscapes. Brown and black people do belong there, and we are just as British. So I think that's how those things are connected for me. But also, you know, there was a whole other layer of stereotype about the North and prejudice. It was so funny because then I got loads of things on social media about how I don't look like Liam Gallagher, therefore I'm not from there. So I did in the book is very much about smashing regional stereotypes and showing that the North isn't all grim up north. There's incredible amounts of there's poverty in the North, and I do think there's a massive North-South divide, but the North's also an incredibly beautiful place. there's beauty here. So I was looking at can be quite a dark beauty and a bleak beauty at times, but it's still incredibly beautiful. So I was smashing kind of stigma and stereotypes about the natural landscape to the north.
It's a very
as well.
proudly northern book. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Let me give you a little something from Anita Sethi, who put in the chat. This talk has inspired me to walk along the Pennines. Thank you, Anita. I'm a woman of colour myself, of Jamaican descent. I cannot wait to read your book. So
Thank you. That means a lot. Really heartwarming to hear that.
Yeah. So we've got 3 minutes left, I'm afraid, 2 minutes left. So what I want to say is, if anyone's got a last minute question, do please ask Anita now. But I want to say thank you so much. That was really interesting. The time has flown by, and I had so many more questions, but you answered half of them as you were going along. But thank you. I belong here. Which, can you hold it up again so everyone can see it? Because
yes,
a bit higher. There you go.
It blurs away into the background when you have a Zoom background. It's very spooky.
I'm sure
like the
you're
photo in Back to the Future, but the book, yeah, you see what happens. It's very spooky. But anyway,
it's a magical book.
There's the mountains of it, and Peter will be getting his signed copy in the post any day now. I promise. Thank you so much for a wonderful interview. It was an absolute pleasure to speak with you. Thank you to the Urban Tree Festival for having me. Thanks to the Woodland Trust for supporting the event, and thank you, Peter, for a fantastic interview. Looking forward. Peter's also got a book out in October all about his travels around Greece, and I point everyone to his amazing book Footnotes as well, which is a fantastic read.
Thank you, Anita, and don't forget, everyone, that the Urban Trees Festival survives on donations if you feel inclined that way. And thank you, Anita, that's absolutely brilliant. And I hope
thank you. Thanks.
Soon. Andrew's coming and said last word, I think.
Well, yeah, Anita, fantastic. Thank you very much. Walking very close to my heart, because I run the Museum of Walking and the podcast Walking, of which Peter submitted to being interviewed. So maybe I can persuade you to be interviewed too at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to. Would love to do that.
In the meantime, a very big thank you from all of us at the Urban Tree Festival, because that was...
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for organising this amazing gathering. It's fantastic.
That was hugely entertaining and also made us think, which is really crucial. Now, we've got lots of things going on yet with the festival. Coming up tomorrow evening, we have Tracy Chevalier and Jonathan Drury. Peter Fiennes is chairing an eco-philosophy debate on Saturday at 1 o'clock. So please do get involved in that. And there's I've put in the chat the programme at a glance, but a big thank you to everybody for coming along, and especially to Anita and Peter for entertaining us this evening.